What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Alex Cuesta Show. How is everybody doing out there on this Wednesday, August 24th of 2023? Before we get into all the fun stuff, like, share, follow, subscribe, rate 5 stars, Spotify and iTunes. Spread this word of mouth. Find us on the socials at the Alex Cuesta Show. David, I was going to be mean to you again this week, but Uncle John told me I need to be nicer to you. So I guess it's to be nice to you for a week.
That's the bit. The bit is for you to be mean to me. But instead, I'll be mean to you because you made a really dumb choice of having Rest Stop Auntie Anne's Pigs in a Blanket 40 minutes before getting to our mother's house, an Italian mother who makes a feast every time we have dinner. So you messed up this weekend.
And to make it worse, so, we'll be full disclosure here. Me and my brother, our grandmother passed away. I had to go home for the wake and the funeral these last 2 days. And what David is referring to is I had Rest Stop Auntie Anne's, the pigs in the blanket with the pretzel wrapped right before, like he said. And I ended up being food poisoned for 2 days. So going through my grandmother's wake, being a pallbearer, just in terrible pain. It took some Docalax to fix me. And it was, made a terrible situation even worse. But as per usual, I am the laughing stock. So at least I gave people comedy in a dark time. Is laughing at me, not with me, but still.
But you deserve it.
I did deserve it. And, Nona understands. She knows who I am. She would have just looked at me and been like, yo, strunzo, Alessandro. And that would have just been the end of it. So last week, we didn't have a guest, but we did talk about all the things going on Maui and stuff like that. And that was really the main big crux that we talked about. And, I want to reiterate, just go on mercury1.org, go donate. They still need your help in Maui because Joe Biden finally got around to basically flying over on Monday, and the federal government still doesn't care about its own citizens, but a few more billion to Ukraine, no problem. So definitely go on there, check out last week's episode. This week, I'm excited because this is a guest that it's been a long time that we kind of been chit-chatting about coming on the show, and things didn't work out here and there, but we finally got it down. He is Ryan James Girdusky. He's the author of They're Not Listening: How the Elites Created the National Populist Revolution and the National Populist Newsletter Substack. What's going on, Ryan?
Thanks for having me, guys.
Of course.
Yeah, super excited to have you on. And, I think you're somebody that's going to jive with both of us because I feel like David and I both kind of fall a little more on that populist realm of the right. So, this is going to be one of those possibly nauseating episodes where we just kind of agree the whole time. But who knows? Maybe we might have a little fun. So I want to start right off and first, I want to ask you, if people go on the National Populist Newsletter, what do they expect to see? What's some of, obviously, populist content, but what's some of the stuff that you typically write about on there?
So I write a weekly newsletter, which is basically just like almost bullet points of the news of the week from a global perspective on National Populist News. Everything from like deep dives, which may be university or medical studies that are interesting, to content like op-eds I find interesting, polling information. And then a few times a week, I'll write some political deep dive. The last one was on the immigration numbers out of New York State and what that could mean for local elections in New York, which we have 52 upcoming local elections in New York City. And a couple weeks before then, I'm sure it was something else related to that. It was something on Italy and Europe. But whatever comes to my mind, I find very interesting that is politically related. Basically, whenever I have an op-ed idea, I write it for my Substack.
And that makes sense. And that's kind of been the cool thing about Substack. They've kind of revolutionized the op-ed world where you don't have to hopefully be able to jump into Wall Street Journal or something like that to get an op-ed and even go to like a unfriendly spot like a New York Times. You could just make your own stuff. And if you're good, people will subscribe. And, we found a lot of really good young conservative minds like yourself that have been able to find success there, which is always awesome considering Dave and I have been on the right our whole lives. And we've heard from our dads screaming at Rush Limbaugh about how much they all hate us. So, it's always It's always good to just see all of this happening. Now,
yeah, well, it's good for a writer because you don't deal with editors, which is a double-edged sword because you have a lot of grammatical mistakes, but you can write what you want to write, which is refreshing.
I mean, that's why you almost have like someone else that you trust that you know can write. So if you really think like, I need something, you just copy edit this, don't change a thing. Just make sure it's grammatically cool. Like that sometimes does help there.
Yeah.
So I want to jump off right away. I want to talk about the Republican debates. They were held on the formerly conservative-friendly Fox News, because I don't consider Fox News a place that's friends to conservatives anymore. So the RNC first debate occurred. There were a lot of people on the stage. In my eyes, very few that mattered. To you, Ryan, who won the debate last night?
I think there were like probably 3 winners, I think, or maybe I'd say 4 winners. There were probably 4 winners. I think Pence, Haley, Vivek, and DeSantis were the 4 winners. So those are my top 4. Yeah.
So quickly go over, because, Pence and Haley are surprising in a way, because I thought Pence, pun intended, came off very pensive. No, I mean, he came off a little more angry than I think a lot of us expected to see Pence. I think we've always, especially with his time as a vice president, the more mild-mannered, the more very well put together. And he was a lot more forceful in this debate. So what made you like Pence? What made you think he got a win there?
Well, remember, Pence has been in office for 30 years on and off. So it's not like he doesn't go to this as an inexperienced man. And I think a big part of why Pence is running is for his legacy. In the same way that I think it's partly why Christie's running is for his legacy. Pence does not want to be remembered ultimately as the man who, was Donald Trump's vice president. I don't think that's what he wants his lasting legacy to be. And I think this is the Mike Pence redemption tour. Now, he has a very outside chance of getting a nomination. He's definitely a dark horse, but he can set the record straight on January 6th, on his time as vice president, on the issues he cared about, on things that matter to evangelicals. And he sounded like a very serious, sober person. My dad called me, who's, I guess he would be a young boomer. He's the last year of boomers, or second to last year. And he said to me, Mike Pence is a really good person. And I think a lot of people who don't necessarily like him, they remembered, oh, wow, he is a decent guy and a nice person. I think that, so that's why I think that Pence did the job that he was looking to do. The one thing that he should have sat there and said when discussing January 6th and the vote and everything like that was, he should have said, do you think I didn't like being vice president and didn't want to continue being vice president for 4 more years? That's something that he should have said that I guess was a missed opportunity.
I think one of the things that hurts Mike Pence, and I think from like the MAGA movement, right? Because for the longest time, MAGA was just fine with Mike Pence. He was a vice president, and him and Trump seemed to be in lockstep on a lot. I think what hurt him in their eyes is in one of the interviews he did, he kind of hinted that he could have thrown it back like they wanted to. And then at times he kind of said he was never going to. And I think that little bit of, going up and down and kind of not knowing if he wanted to continue to be more of like an establishment guy or really join in that populist movement has kind of put him in a way where MAGA is just kind of like, well, yeah, I guess we all know how MAGA is. Like, if you're not with us, you're against us, which some people, MAGA people wouldn't like me because although I voted for Trump, I still support him. I'm not a like crazy zealot. I can admit the man's faults, and I just at this point still think he's the best for the job. But, it's like, I think that's where he falls very short with MAGA at that point. And unfortunately for him, and I don't think anything he can say is going to put him in a good light in their eyes.
Well, I don't think that one matters that much to him ultimately. And I don't think there was a way for him to throw it back to the states. I think that's a nonsensical argument. I think that it's completely asinine. I mean, most of the states, Secretary of States, and all those states were Democrat anyway. It wouldn't have gone anywhere anyway, even if he could have, but he didn't have that power. And I think that he felt like he did the responsible thing, and he was a serious grown-up in the room. Take him compared to Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek was a bomb thrower. And Vivek's personality, I think, was very off-putting to a lot of people in that debate. But sorry, my dog is barking in the background.
It's no problem. We like dogs.
But I think that the thing that Vivek did that was very smart was that Vivek cornered the anti-war Ukraine argument. So even though I think there are less people who like him from greater exposure to him cornering a very large issue that 35 to 40% of the Republican Party agree with, helped increase his momentum with a smaller portion, but not an infinitely small portion. When I was a Ron Paul supporter in 2008, the anti-war movement was probably like 10% of the party, and versus now it's probably 40% of the party. Mm-hmm. So it was a much bigger gamble for like a Ron Paul 15 years ago than it was for Vivek this time. And I think Vivek did that role correctly, even if he's an incredibly off-putting person to most people.
Yeah, I think Vivek is going to have to learn from this debate, because when he's alone doing speeches and just a one-on-one sit down, I think he does a good job. I think in this setting where you're kind of competing for time and, I think he was a little too forceful. I think it's a good way to put it. He tried to insert himself, and he was getting a lot of bombs thrown his way as well. So he was
setting himself up for that. He was purposely setting himself up as the opposition to Nikki Haley and Chris Christie primarily. I think Mike Pence one or two times, but that's what he was setting himself up. But I mean, Vivek's largest problem is Vivek is a fraud. Vivek is genuinely a Nigerian prince promising you $100 million. The guy who said climate change was a hoax in the debate yesterday, 4 months ago, said climate change is real. You can point to almost anything Vivek has said in the last 2 years. He has been on the opposite side of that issue on literally everything.
So I assume you're not a Vivek supporter.
No, Vivek is definitely not my cup of tea. Definitely.
So I'm just curious, did you read Woke Inc. or anything he did or anything he talked about beforehand?
When I met him, he gave me a copy. I have multiple friends who went to Yale with him, and they were the first ones to kind of say to me, listen, this guy is a giant freaking fake. And then, you know what I point to? He kind of reminds me like the Gary Johnson of this year. If you remember who Gary Johnson was.
I remember Gary.
Because Gary Johnson, sorry, my dog just walked into my room.
It's all right. That's okay, Ryan.
Was on, I don't know how he opened the door. Say hello. What's it called? Vivek reminds me of Gary Johnson. Gary Johnson back in 2012, he decided to make a run for the Republican primary for president. At the time, he was just leaving his term as governor of New Mexico. And at the time, I think New Mexico had an open U.S. Senate seat that he could have won. But rather than being a senator from New Mexico and keep flipping a blue seat red, he seceded the entire thing to go have this Don Quixote style useless run for president, because it's more about promoting himself than it is about trying to actually be part of a governing process. And that's what Vivek is. When Vivek says like we're going to get rid of the FBI, and all these government departments, I think that he is just, not only is he not being serious in the issues, but he's also not being serious on what we could do as a governing majority. And it is very, very upsetting to me as a geriatric millennial that our three millennial candidates who had run for president now, Andrew Yang, Pete Buttigieg, and Vivek Ramaswamy, have all been huge disappointments and attention seekers and have large egos and all the worst traits of millennial culture.
I'll go on record saying I'm happy that 2 out of the 3 of those are giant failures, because I'm not a Yang or a Buttigieg guy. But Vivek, the thing that he's doing is, I think he's reading Twitter a lot, and he's seeing what's popular at the moment, and he's definitely saying it, and he's trying to get in with the movement and saying those things. And he's definitely, like you said, the bomb thrower out there, and he's going to put a lot of guys in defensive. I think in a lot of the ways he's trying to do what Donald Trump did, but there's very few that have the Donald Trump moxie.
But he's not trying to be part of the movement. what has Vivek ever said about legal immigration?
Not that I know of. Yeah.
In his Twitter space with Elon Musk, he said that he supports unlimited college education migration in the United States. What has he said about trade? Said we should get back into TPP.
Yeah.
Vivek is not part of the movement. He's not an actual populist. He's not even an actual nationalist. He's an attention seeker. He's an insufferable millennial. And unfortunately, my generation has produced an overabundance of that type of personality. And they seem to run for president every 4 years. And I don't think it's going to get better. I think that's going to get worse, where we have insufferable millennials running for president and being blowhards without any noticeable accomplishments towards when it comes to government. I mean, Pete Buttigieg was a horrendous mayor, super unpopular, could not win a statewide office in Indiana. So now he's Secretary of Transportation, and he says, thought it was all going to be ribbon cuttings. I'm so shocked that it's not just ribbon cuttings. He's gone missing half the time. And Andrew Yang had a failed mayoral run for New York City. So this is kind of like where we are with this generation. And I kind of think it's not going to get better anytime soon.
So you're not excited for AOC's presidential run in a few years?
I know she's doing it much more capable than these guys.
I mean, capable of destroying, yes.
I think she's a more credible candidate when it comes to stuff than these people have, because, I mean,
she has federal government experience.
She has federal government experience, and she knows kind of the legislative process, and I think she's grown up a little bit. But, you know, in the same way, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene has grown up a little bit, being part of that. I think when you're an idealistic businessman who sits there and says, it's like the uncle that you know who thinks that he could run the Giants better than the Giants coach. Mm-hmm. That's very much the vibe at a lot of the millennial candidates is, I could run the federal government if only I was in charge.
So I'm just curious, you mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene. Do you think there's value in her getting behind Kevin McCarthy? Because I didn't like what she was doing. I thought that it was better off. I didn't want McCarthy at all. I was hoping that he was going to give it up. And I think we see McCarthy's done some good, but McCarthy, like a lot of conservatives, has paid a lot of lip service. And I understand you can only do so much at so many times, right? Like Republicans have to pick their battles, it seems, where Democrats go full bore. They impeach Donald Trump twice. They pushed Obamacare through back in the day when it was basically illegally pushed through. When Republicans get in these positions, they're kind of like, oh, but we'll try. And so, with MTG, the maturation process, I think, is kind of like getting a little bit more into the uniparty. And if that's a maturation process for the right, then I want a new one.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with you. I mean, if you look at what Obama did, like Obamacare at the time, he had 255 House seats and 60 Senate seats. We don't have anything close to those majorities right now. If you look at what they did with impeaching Donald Trump, even then, I mean, Democrats have much larger majorities than Republicans do right now. And the bigger thing is that we have a dozen some odd Republicans who are in Biden seats. That make up the majority, whether we like it or not. We did lose a lot of redistricting fights that made a lot of seats very tough for Republicans. Mm-hmm. I think that at a certain point, you have to decide, when you are a legislator, what am I here to do? Am I here to be a bomb thrower forever and never pass a bill? Am I here to never have an amendment, never sit on a committee, never be part of the process that gets something done? Or do I want to get something done? There is a certain thing about throwing bombs and being Lauren Boebert. But Lauren Boebert will never get any serious bills ever accomplished. Lauren Boebert will be one vote among 220-something Republicans, 219 Republicans, who will stand in opposition or for something, but they will never actually accomplish anything they're really looking forward to doing. You juxtapose that with a Republican House member, some of which you probably don't know their names, because they don't sit there and get on television all that often, but they get on powerful committees that they hold up legislation to get legislation through. They're part of the argument process. I mean, there is a reason why places like Tennessee had two senators for the longest time that had a lot of governing power, even though they were very quiet. You wouldn't see them on television quite a bit. There's a lot of Republicans who had very strong positions in the House of Representatives who you wouldn't know. Mike McCall or I'm trying to think of someone that nobody would really, really know. There are a bunch of them out there that have a lot of excise and outsized power. And you have to decide, what do you want to do? If all you want to do is throw bombs, then Go right ahead, throw all the bombs you want. MTG's district is as Republican as it'll ever get. But the truth is, Kevin McCarthy was not going to lose the speakership. He had paid and spent so much money, raised so much money for Republicans, they weren't going to abandon him. And they got a lot of leverage out of it. And they got all they were going to get out of it. And look at what Matt Rosendale did. Matt Rosendale, by being part of that process, and I like Matt Rosendale a lot, he, very well may have ended his U.S. Senate run by doing that. So I think that's the big question you have to ask yourself. And I think Marjorie, and I know Marjorie a little bit, I think Marjorie wants to be somebody who solves problems and is part of the collaborative process rather than just being on the outside forever.
And I see both sides. I think there's value to being a part of that collaborative process, but I also think there's value in stonewalling the things that don't work. So I think it's good. There's good and bad, and that's kind of the functions of government, right? The government.
If you sit on a committee, you can get a lot more done.
Yeah, there's value.
If you don't, because where the committee votes are, where things get held up or moved a lot faster.
100%. So I want to jump back to the debates, and I love that. I like that little back and forth there. Nikki Haley, you mentioned Nikki Haley was a winner.
She was great.
Let me hear what Nikki Haley did. What do you like about Nikki?
Nikki was the one. She criticized Trump correctly. Mm-hmm. She approached the abortion issue very sensibly. And I think that even though I disagree with her position on Ukraine, Vivek, was the most coherent in opposition to Vivek's argument. So while I disagree with her, what she's saying, I know the Republican voters she is speaking to, and she came across very strong to them. And I think this is my consultant brain, a person who works on campaigns. I think she did what she had to do, as opposed to like Tim Scott, who faded into the background, and I honestly forgot that he was even on the stage half the time. And I think that that's what she needed to land, and she landed it very, very well. And I think she had really good one-liners, and she was strong. She was a very strong debate. She's been doing it for a long time.
So, and the thing with Nikki is Nikki was skyrocketing for so long, and for whatever reason, I think a lot of it had to do with things that Trump said, and then DeSantis eventually running definitely hurt her star on the way up, because people were looking at DeSantis being much more of a rising star in that way. And I mean, when you get mentioned so early on, like Nikki Haley was 3-4 years, like basically right after Trump was, lost, let's start looking at Nikki. That tends to kind of bring you up and down. I think DeSantis is seeing some of that now. 2 years into the suspected run, we're getting to this point. How did Ron DeSantis do for himself in the debate?
Well, let me push back on Nikki. I don't think that's true. I think that Nikki Haley's biggest problem is Nikki has been unemployed for 3 years. She was the UN ambassador for a year. Mm-hmm. And the UN ambassador is one of the easiest jobs in government. It doesn't actually require any responsibility at all. She was a governor for 6 years, and she didn't perform that well in her elections, nor did she do anything like cut spending. She wasn't a particularly enthusiastic governor. The only thing she's really remembered for her time as governor was taking down the Confederate flag. Yeah. And before that, she was in the State House of Representatives, where she was a close ally to the very conservative governor at the time. But that's all Nikki Haley's ever really been known for. I can name for you, I'm not obviously a Hillary Clinton supporter, but I can give you, top of my head, Hillary Clinton's speeches, things that she accomplished, things that she did. If you're going to be the Republican version of Hillary Clinton, you better have done something worth sitting there and saying. Nikki Haley's never done anything worth saying. Mm-hmm. She was a mediocre governor about a decade ago. Oh, not a decade ago, but, a solid 8 years ago. And was a UN ambassador for a year. Mm-hmm. And she's been unemployed since then. So I think that, and she was on the board of either Raytheon or something like that. So that's all she's done. And she kind of totes the exact same line, the carbon copy line you would hear from Asa Hutchinson or Tim Scott or anybody else. She just delivered it in a much more enthusiastic way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that there's some truth to that. And, I didn't even come to think of the 3 years unemployed, and that makes a difference, right? Because you're out of the limelight for 3 years. People aren't seeing what you're doing for 3 years. And that definitely makes sense. So I want to jump to DeSantis, because for all intents and purposes, DeSantis was the guy that, was to beat that night. And Vivek took a lot of the bombs, and DeSantis I think just delivered another solid performance. And what we're getting from DeSantis lately is not explosive, not the press conferences he was doing as the Florida governor, right, where he was making headlines, but where he's doing his good job is he's just looking really good. He's giving good, solid answers. I think it would have been nice to see him mix it up a few times, which he really tried to avoid. But overall, I thought he just did a good job. I don't think he hurt himself, but I still think he needs to do more in order to win some more of the people over.
Well, I think that he came up presidential, which was very important, which is super important. But I think that it's really funny because it's a big question of how is the media going to react to which person is the media going to jump on the day after? The media jumped on DeSantis today. His two comments the media reacted to was that Democrats want abortion to the point of birth. Yeah. Jen Psaki tweeted and said that's not true.
She got destroyed.
And then Jen Psaki went on MSNBC later that day and goes, I don't know a single thing he said, even though she just copied him. Yeah. And MSNBC was crying, saying he was totally forgetful, and then spent the entire day talking about what he had said, forgetful performance, but then talking about the border and talking about crime. The big three issues facing our country are the economy, immigration, and crime. That is what we are talking about. Spending the last 6 months talking about wokeism has been a giant waste of time for his campaign. He was the best on the border, and he was the best on crime. And I think he was presidential while coming off saying those things. And yeah, he had a couple like applause lines that were like a little cringy or a little rehearsed, but overall very presidential. And the polls are reflecting that. So,
yeah, I thought he did a good job. And I think one of the things DeSantis and his team needs to do, I agree with you. Mention the woke and the cultural world stuff when necessary, right? When it needs to be addressed, address it. Don't push it at nauseum. But another thing I heard him do in one of his most recent interviews, he mentioned that he was a founding member of the Freedom Caucus. He mentioned his military service. I think they need to keep on going back to that, because Freedom Caucus is something that if you have been a conservative now for any recent time, Freedom Caucus is one of the things that if you look towards in the House, you're like, okay, which way is the Freedom Caucus going on this? And that's kind of usually been in lockstep with a lot of the populist right conservatives have wanted. I think he needs to lean on that more. I think, like you said, his border, with the type of things that he's done as governor, he needs to lean on. And I think he got to that last night where he did a lot more of his record as the Florida governor, because it's extremely strong. And, and I think he gets the raw deal of being painted as, a neocon, because he has a lot of supporters that are neocons. And I don't care who you are, you're going to take that money. If it's donor money, it doesn't matter if it's coming from the biggest neocon or anything, you're going to take that money if you're trying to win a presidential campaign. So, I just think that he falls into that issue of, getting those people in his corner that look bad to a lot of, of your hard right populists. But he needs to keep falling back on the fact of, hey, I was strong as governor on every single thing that every Trump supporter voted for Donald Trump for. And I can do the job as well. And I think he did a little bit of that last night.
Well, when I was with the governor, what I said to him was that you lack a national vision, which is ultimately, I think, is the problem. You can't talk forever about what you're going to do for Florida because, you're not working to be the advertising people tourism in Florida. That's, this is not what you're running for. You're running for president. And you can't plant palm trees in Michigan and Wisconsin. So what are you going to do for those people?
You can, it just won't work.
That's what I said in point blank. What are you going to do? What is your national vision? And I think that he's getting there closer and closer now. I just don't think he was there when he first announced. Yeah. But he did very, very well in this debate. And hopefully he gets closer to there as the debates shrink and there's fewer candidates talking.
And I think Ron just needs to embrace who he is a little more sometimes and don't try to be this ultra charismatic guy. Ron DeSantis is a little bit awkward in his public settings. We see it. But we've had presidents that are very, not to say Ron's milquetoast, but we've had milquetoast presidents. That's not something that is going to necessarily hurt him. I think at times when his campaign kind of sets him up to do these public things that, aren't necessarily in his style, in his character. Like when he was passing out the hot dogs and stuff, like that didn't look natural for him. Like he doesn't need to do things like that. He could do other things on the ground to engage and embrace that are still going to make him look good.
Well, the two most humanizing answers he talked about yesterday was he talked about abortion, and he talked about who survived an abortion, and he talked about angel moms and victims of crime, and he spoke about that in deeply humanizing instances. And although he himself may not be comfortable with sharing his personal story, his personal life, and clearly he's not, it's shocking that he is a presidential candidate and we've never even heard about his parents one time, and they're both still alive. His sister had passed away recently. No one knows really why or how. He's very buttoned up about his personal life to a certain degree, except for his marriage and children. But if you're not going to talk about yourself in that setting, talk about Americans in a humanizing fashion, how you want to help them. And I think that he hit on that yesterday, which was very impressive.
Yeah, last night's a good springboard in his campaign. He should definitely work from that, because I think that was a good springboard for him. Now, I think he still has a really uphill battle, because I want to jump to the Tucker Carlson Donald Trump interview that went on at the same time as the debate. First off, I want to get your take on what did you think of the interview?
So I only saw clips on Twitter. I didn't watch the whole thing. It was a very softball interview. You didn't learn anything. I guess the big hot take was that Trump thinks that Epstein killed himself, which I've always thought, by the way. So it doesn't really shock me.
So Trump gave a very wishy-washy answer, because I want to say one thing.
It was weird. No, like Trump landed on he killed himself, but it was also like he was allowing Tucker to also say what he wanted to say. It was a very weird conversation. It was just like that awkward conversation where, one guy believes something else, someone believes something. It's like, whatever, we'll agree to disagree. And it kind of just passed over it afterwards.
Yeah, Tucker asked him, do you think Epstein killed himself? And was like, Trump was like, well, he could have, but I think he just committed suicide. There were a lot of people gunning for him. And that disappointed me from Trump, because, again, I like the brash Trump. So I feel like Trump should have been like, absolutely, he got killed. What are you talking about? So that actually did. So if that was the big take from Twitter, Twitter's wrong. Trump didn't say that Epstein killed himself. He was very wishy.
Well, no, he did say that Epstein killed himself.
No, Epstein killed himself. Yeah, Epstein killed himself. He didn't say that Epstein was killed. He was very, it was weird. It was weird.
The other question I saw was, how does it feel to be indicted so many times? Who gives a shit?
Tucker did ask him if he thinks he's going to be killed. That was a big question that I thought was weird. Tucker asked him if he thinks that he's going to be killed.
Afraid of Trump's famously afraid of being murdered. That's why he eats at McDonald's anonymously. Like that's why he orders food there famously, because no one will know who he is. That's okay. That's a kind of interesting question. How about this? Why'd you let your Democrat son-in-law run the White House for 4 years? That'd be a great question. I would love to be asked. Why did your Democrat son-in-law call himself the prime minister in meetings at the White House and do things that you opposed? Why did you fire every person attached to the 2016 campaign, basically, except for like 2 or 3? Why aren't they not working for you now? I would love to know your answers on that. I would love to know when Sean Hannity asked you in 2020, what's your second term agenda? And he didn't have an answer. What's your second term agenda now? Because do you have an answer yet? Is it those flying cars and cities in Wyoming that you're going to build? What's the second term agenda you're going to talk about? I've not heard any of that. And I would love to know why why'd you hire John Bolton? It wasn't like you didn't know John Bolton was a feverish war hawk.
Yep.
You knew that. You knew that going in. It's not like a hidden secret. And you did it anyway. So why? What's your love obsession with Maggie Haberman from the New York Times? Why do you keep on calling her? I would love to know those things. Why did you offer amnesty and a deal to the Democrats? Do you regret that at all? Why didn't you lock up Hillary? These are all answers worth asking. And he didn't ask any of them. So I don't really care about the interview because, I mean, I've seen a million Trump interviews asking, questions that are very big softballs. And the problem with liberals is they ask questions that are nonsense. And Tucker Carlson's one of the few people in America could have gotten away with asking him hardballs and didn't. So.
And I think there's the fear, though, of, and I'm not, Tucker's done great work, but guys like your Tucker, guys like your Sean Hannity's, your Bill O'Reilly's, who will get these presidents, right? And these presidential candidates, these big time guys, they want to maintain being able to get them. So asking these tougher questions.
Why? Tucker Carlson is an heir to a very, very large fortune.
Agreed.
He has a lot of money. He has every bestseller you would possibly want. He has millions of fans who would follow him to the end. Why not make the journalistic moment of your life? Why sit there because when he was on Fox News and when Trump was in the White House, he was bashing Jared Kushner.
Mm-hmm. He was.
So do we just pretend that none of that ever happened? When I was with DeSantis, I said to DeSantis, I'd stop worrying about Trump handing Fauci the country for 1 year. He handed Jared the country for all 4 years. Mm-hmm. Does Trump have any opinions that his son-in-law got $2 billion from the Saudi government, or while he was in the White House, his dilapidated building in 666 Fifth Avenue, got a 99-year lease from a Qatari bank in Canada? That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Why did that happen? I would love to know, how these two grifters who were part of his family in the White House, who were making policy, who were the Hunter Bidens of the Republican Party, they got away with it, and now they pretend that they never existed.
Yeah, and I did say Dave, you could remember this. Once he got in, Jared Kushner is going to handle a lot of the foreign relations stuff. I saw from the ending. We know who his dad is. We know what his dad did for so long, and we knew Jared Kushner was going to be, extremely heavily involved in the foreign relation things. And so, do you think he was as involved in the Abraham Accords as people say that he was? Because he gets a ton of credit for Abraham Accords, Jared Kushner.
Sure, but remember, I don't know if you know this or not, but Jared Kushner's father's longtime, very close friend is Bibi Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. When Bibi used to come to America in the 80s and 90s, he would stay at the Kushners. He would stay in Jared's childhood room, and Jared would have to sleep on the couch. So that is who did the most dealing and who was in charge? Was it Bibi? Was it Jared? Who knows? He was part of it, and that's an accomplishment. It's a legit accomplishment, and I'm not criticizing Jared for that. But we didn't get a lot of things done on a lot of other promises we made by the Trump administration. And Jared's key domestic policy was letting criminals out of jail. Mm-hmm. Homicides reached a 30-year high under Trump's presidency. And Jared made crime one of his major issues. We never got most of the immigration things that were promised. Jared put himself in charge of building the wall that was never finished. Jared put himself in charge of the PPP loans that were completely disastrous. Jared seemed to have a huge portfolio in the White House, far beyond just foreign policy. And with the exception of trade, which was under Robert Lighthizer, although trade Jared took credit for too, which was completely absurd. But Bob Lighthizer, who's a very serious and well-established and smart man with decades of Washington experience, he was more in charge of putting together a lot of our great trade agreements. Even though Jared took credit, he took credit for everything. So I think that is what I think that a lot of what Jared did was not that great. But why was Trump's closest advisor the one who was telling him to stay in the Paris Accord? That was Jared and Ivanka. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a lot of questions to be answered of when Trump didn't get to something, how much of it was just Jared was behind it. Trump was forced into the basement of the White House because Jared's advisors told him not to criticize BLM and not to send in the Marines, not to send the military.
So I would imagine a second term Trump, the biggest thing he could do for you is say Jared Kushner and Ivanka aren't involved.
The reason I'm not supporting Trump for a second term is because my big fear about Donald Trump is that the people that Donald Trump wants now, and I would have walked on broken glass and hot coals to vote for him in 2016. Yep. But the people that Donald Trump wants to make happy the most, the people that he cares of their opinion the most, is Maggie Haberman, is Jonathan Swan, is the editor of the New York Times, it's Morning Joe. That's whose praise he wants. You know, famously during January 6th, he commented why everyone was dressing so slovenly. You know, the working class are people he knows how to talk to, but I don't think he really honestly loves their praise as much as he wants the establishment's praise. It's what he's wanted his entire life since he was a Queens realtor or real estate developer. And I am afraid that a second Trump term without the fear of a re-election, I mean, he could sit there and say, hey, I'm going to do an amnesty 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to finally get love from the Morning Joe crew, and they're all going to love me. He still takes, you know, multiple copies of papers every time his face is on the cover of any paper that there is. Because this is a man who desires the love of the media, like an insane desire that's almost, you know, unparalleled. And I don't think that he will. I think that a lot of people believe Trump will be their retribution. A lot of conservatives, a lot of working class people, and I think Trump is going to be. I think this is the legacy term for Trump, to not destroy the establishment, but earn their love.
I think that's fair, considering that he keeps on going back to do the types of interviews he does, and the people that he goes to talk to. A lot of times, like you said, he'll go and he'll take the CNN town hall before he does anything else. And why would you do that, right? So I think that's fair. And I think, you know, I think both sides might be fair, because we've seen angry Trump. And if we get angry Trump, he might go in there and at least do in the beginning what he says he's going to do, just start firing a ton of people. But
when did he ever do that, though?
I mean, he didn't go. No, that was his biggest mistake. He didn't go in and clean house. And
he brought them all in. He hired Hillary Clinton staffers in his first term in his White House.
His biggest issue was he went and he trusted Washington people.
No, his big mistake was that when Chris Christie was put in charge of his transition team, Jared fired Christie over the prosecution of his father, and then Jared was put in charge, and Jared turns to Reince Priebus and said, you fill my administration. And there was a man named Johnny DeStefano, who was the first head of PPO, which is the policy office personnel office in the White House. And Johnny DeStefano, who at that time, he was formerly working for Data Trust, the RNC data company, and had attended an end of the world party when Trump was the nominee. He filled it completely with anti-Trump people. And the most infuriating part was that Trump had a meeting with Ginny Thomas and several other conservative activists. And Trump said, why do all these people who hate me in this administration? And Louis Gohmert's chief of staff, pointed to Johnny, who was sitting at the meeting, and said, he's doing it. He's filling your administration with them. And Trump still didn't fire him. So it's not, he didn't not do something. He wasn't inactive in his own destruction, in his own inefficiencies, in his own, getting lost on the DC blob. He created it and made it worse. And there is no signs whatsoever that he's going to make it better, because what is the White House in waiting right now? Do you know?
No, no one does.
No, they do. It's called the America First Policy Institute. Brooke Rollins, who was a Jared person, was working with Jared in the White House, created a nonprofit called the America First Policy Institute. She was the key author, one of the key authors behind the First Step Act, and she has said that she would love to see a Second Step Act where more criminals are released from jail. And when she was in Texas, she was the head of the Texas Policy Foundation. She supported amnesty for illegal aliens. So there is no sign whatsoever that this man has learned anything. His team is better than they've ever been, his campaign team, but they're also more established than they've ever been. Chris LaCivita, who's a very smart man and very capable, worked for Paul Ryan's super PAC. It's part of the Never Trump movement, Stop Trump movement. It's Trump's key person. Mm-hmm. Susie Wiles, longtime established Republican. Brian Jacks. Brian Jacks was the head of Trump's endorsement team when he was in the White House. All the bad endorsements he kept on making for Mitt Romney, that was Brian Jacks. He's still there. They're all still there. It's not changing. So I cannot believe and I know a lot of this is inside baseball that like my grandpa wouldn't necessarily know or care about. But this is something to me where I sat there when I was with Governor DeSantis, I said point blank, how many illegal immigrants do you want in this country every year? And he said, we need to cut it in half. And I said, how do you do that? And we went point by point. And I knew that he was serious about the topic. And even when I have now, I'm as I'm aging, as I'm getting into the geriatric millennial phase of my life, I am more and more embracing the Ronald Reagan 80-20. Even if I'm against someone 20% of the time, I will take that 80% win just for something, just for literally anything at this point. And, we can't have another election cycle of Donald Trump, for every one great endorsement, for every one JD Vance that we got, and I worked on JD Vance's team from Trump, we got like 4 Carrie Lakes. And like, we can't have these maniacs running around who don't actually care about policy when it comes to helping out working class Americans, because their lives are literally on the line in many ways. And I think that that's the most infuriating thing for Trump. I have not heard Trump ever articulate anything serious about personnel, ever articulate anything serious about, policy when it comes to the working class. And I'm willing to gamble that DeSantis is serious enough on it. Because I've asked him point blank a few of these questions, and he's been less articulate than I desire on the campaign trail. I think that he is with us more than anyone else is.
And I respect the way you come at it, because number one, you have a lot of the inside knowledge. And I think you're a person that is good for DeSantis. I think there's a lot of Twitter personalities that are awful for Ron DeSantis. And I really think that they actually are paid by Donald Trump or Vivek Ramaswamy, because there's no way I could believe that some of these people who I have followed for years that have generally been really good political followers, intelligent people, have all of a sudden just become, animals.
Do you want to name any?
No, I'm not going to name any. I'm going to be nice, because eventually maybe I want to have them on this show. But, if people came at it the way you did, where you just break things down in a more nuanced manner, right? You're not attacking Trump just saying like, oh, he's an idiot, he's this and that. No, you're saying exactly reasons why, like legitimate reasons why you don't want to go for him again. And it doesn't sound like you're a full-on never Trumper at this point. It sounds like if he wins the nomination, you probably will go his way, but you much prefer Ron DeSantis right now. Is that something that's fair?
I mean, I voted for the man 3 times.
But people have become, not that, but I mean, people have become, now I'm not going to vote for him again.
He has the ability to break people's brains. And look, I don't have any personal negative feelings towards Donald Trump or the Trump family. Like, I don't wish harm or bad things on anybody. Yeah. Even most Trump supporters who are well established, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 who are definitely on my shit list. But besides those 1 or 2 people, I don't wish negative things on any of them. Yeah. I think some of them are crazy, but I think that a lot of them are taking a risk, or a lot of them work in Trump world, or a lot of them part of the MAGA economy, which has been built on the right. Yep. And you have to accept that's who they are. And also a lot of them do believe that he is going to be their retribution. And, if he is the nominee and the president again, I hope that they're right. I would be rooting for his success if he was president to be what he says he's going to be. I have no faith he's going to be those things. So it's not that I'm rooting against him because I desire a Republican government of George W. Bush again. I desire the government that Donald Trump campaigned on in 2016 but never delivered on.
And that, and that completely and totally makes sense. And I think, you're coming about it again, like I said, one of the best ways that I've heard a DeSantis, an established conservative voice DeSantis supporter, come at it. Now, I want to stay on Trump for a second, because famously today, a few hours ago, Trump made his way down in Fulton County, Georgia, and got booked for his 4th indictment. They quote unquote got their mugshot, which seems that they were all really looking for. What are your feelings on these indictments? And there's a few of them where I think he definitely has some trouble if they stay in New York City, if they stay in DC, because it doesn't matter how bullshit some of these charges are. those juries are not going to be fair to him. What do you feel about these indictments?
I think the New York City one is complete bullshit. I think it will go by the wayside no matter what. I worked in politics for forever, and the legal reasoning behind his indictment is complete nonsense. It's so fucking stupid. It wouldn't pass muster for a city council race in New York. I think the Florida charges about the documents is very serious. I think that could be really, really, really hard hitting. And I think the charges in Georgia are a range. I think that the biggest fear of him that he's going to have to deal with is what if people start turning on him. And the RICO charges are not a joke. And that would be something worth paying attention to. But yeah, those are the things I think that he really should be concerned about. As far as politically goes, as I'm not a lawyer, politically they definitely hurt. If he gets charged and if he gets found guilty, it will be very, very hard. It's very difficult for me to see how he wins the White House again, even against Joe Biden being decrepit and old and an economy in free fall. I think that it would be extremely, extremely difficult for him to win the White House again.
Do you think the right should be rallying around him a little more than we are, considering that this is definitely a banana republic tactic? This is what you see from banana republics, where they go after their, currently all intents and purposes leading political candidate. It's obvious the Biden DOJ, is going after him. They've been doing this. The deep state's been doing this. Now, I didn't know all the inside baseball you did, that he kind of set up his own booby traps in the deep state, but overall, they've been going at him. Do you think the right, whether you support DeSantis, you could say I'm a DeSantis supporter, but these are nonsense, and Donald Trump, shouldn't be getting all this stuff
going on. Hire some of the people we're going at right now. I think our bigger problem is there are not more politicians in jail.
Yes,
I think if it was all leaving, it's not that big of a deal.
I think that if Hillary Clinton would have gone to jail, which she should have over her email,
yes.
I don't think we would care that much. I think if Joe Biden went to jail over Hunter, which he probably should, I don't think we would care that much. It is not unprecedented in first world nations that presidents and prime ministers go to jail. It happens quite often in first world nations. Bibi just did it, I think, in Israel. But what is unusual is this is the first. And if this is, sorry, I'm in New York just like you are. So I think if we had more politicians in jail, people would care a lot less.
100%.
And if this is going to be the litmus test, the Donald Trump litmus test, I would like to see it applied to
everyone.
Biden's and the Clintons. And, it's kind of like when Harry Reid reduce the threshold for a federal court, and Mitch McConnell said, you're going to rue the day. I think a lot of these people are going to rue the day, where if this is going to be the equal playing field argument, okay, then let's have this equal playing field argument. Let's look at the Clintons. Let's look at the Bidens. Let's look at Hunter. And let's look at Bob Menendez. Why isn't Bob Menendez in jail? I mean, Bob Menendez makes George Santos look like a priest. I mean, the man was running.
Love George Santos.
I forgot about
George Santos is such a troll, and he knows what he's doing.
But I mean, Bob Menendez was running prostitute rings allegedly in the Dominican Republic while being a United States senator. The man is highly illegal. So if we're going to do that, I would love a special prosecutor to look at all the insider training for Congress with stocks.
Yes.
And if
Nancy Pelosi would be in jail.
Nancy Pelosi would probably be in jail. Dan Crenshaw allegedly could possibly be in trouble. Tommy Tuberville would probably be in trouble. And I don't care what side of the party they sit there on. So I think the anger from people is more that why is Trump the first one to really get this hammer on a lot of ridiculous charges, but charges nonetheless. Why aren't more people being looked at? And that's what should be.
And, and I think we have an issue right now of the bottom line fact that the left is not your liberals anymore. The left are a lot of them very truly leftists. They're more in the closer to the socialist Marxist sphere than we've seen, at least openly, in a long time. And bottom line, what we've seen from a lot of those is they don't play by rules. Their ends justify the means more than a lot of the things. So we're seeing a lot of that. And we see and again, I go back to the brashness of the left. The left just does things. They'll throw things at the wall until they stick, where the right is much more careful about the future repercussions. And like you said, Mitch McConnell said, you'll rue the day. And something Mitch would have never considered doing what Harry Reid did.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the thing is that the only difference is now is that we are living in a country where almost every institution of power is controlled by the left.
Yes.
So it's also that we're seeing it on a much grander scale because we've never had this position before where we really have very few to no safe places to rest our head. And I think that that's something that is worth. I don't know why my dog is like chewing right now. I don't know if you can hear this.
I can't.
Well, you can.
I can't. I don't.
So just like chewing in the air. I think that that's kind of what we're dealing with. And I think that the bigger problem, especially for boomers right now, and I think that this is what boomers are dealing with, is that they woke up at 60 something years old or 60 years old or 55 or whatever. And they're saying, where the hell did my country go?
Yep.
And so they're saying someone must have stolen it. But the fact of the matter is no one stole it. You gave it away.
Yep.
You had mass immigration that had demographic changes for 30 years. The World War II generation just died out naturally. That's what happens to all generations. You rewarded big media that denigrated your country.
Yep.
You went along inside corporations for probably decades, and you worked there, going along to get along with DEI policies and policies that rewarded people or punished white men for applying there, and now punish Asians for applying to higher education. You gave away the lot.
Truly did radical feminism for the longest time. That's radical feminism has done a lot of damage.
But no one took that from you. You gave it away.
You just didn't say no. You just went along.
You went along to get along. Now, that's not to say that in the last few decades the right hasn't achieved anything. They certainly have. But in large part, a lot of the I can't believe the state of the country comes from things that happened, for decades. My dad again. My dad lives in Florida, and he's a businessman, and he was bitching the other day about DeSantis's bill on E-Verify, and he's a Republican, and he was like, "Yeah, but who's gonna mow the lawn?" And I was like, "Get your ass outside and mow the lawn." Is it worth giving your country away?
Yeah, really.
Like. What I mean,
that just builds on the left's argument about it, right? Because how many times the left said some racist shit where they've been like, "Well, who's going to do the labor in the farms and everything?" And then
Kelly
people
Osbourne
go crazy.
Yeah, Kelly Osbourne. I couldn't remember who it was on the View.
I don't think it's just Kelly Osbourne. We've heard others.
Yeah, but that was the infamous
That was the
thing.
big one.
Yeah.
We've heard other things say exactly like that, like the famous line. The illegal immigrants will do jobs that Americans just don't want to do. And then you have conservative boomers saying the exact fucking thing.
Right, but I mean, look at the whole argument you've seen in the media for decades. I mean, you guys are young. You probably don't remember this, but for decades, the media has been saying out loud, it's so great. We have mass immigration. They're overwhelmingly voting Democrat, and Republicans won't get in the White House anymore.
Yes.
And Republicans are like, we'll see. Let's just keep it going. What? Donald Trump. One of the best exit poll data that you could look at from Trump in 2016 was when they polled him versus Hillary. CNN it was the Edison company that did the poll, but I think it was on CNN.com, and it said, who are you voting for? And Trump won a plurality of the vote of people who were born in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It was just that he lost the foreign-born vote 3-1.
Yeah.
And that is getting harder and harder and harder and harder. And, California is a shithole. New York, in many ways, is a shithole. And everyone keeps leaving, and their populations never seem to change because they keep bringing immigrants in to these states to keep their numbers for Congress the same, to keep their power levels the same, and people who just vote for them over. So there is no real repercussion I mean, there's some economic repercussion, but there's no sizable repercussion. If we were to keep immigration levels the way they were in 1999, which is not that long ago. I mean, for you guys, you probably weren't born yet, but for
Hey, I was born in 88. I'm not that young.
I was born in 96.
1988, yeah.
Oh, 88. Oh, you're much older than I thought you were. I thought you were like in the 90s. Okay.
Thanks for the
That's a compliment. Right
yeah.
there.
It's the lighting.
Oh yeah, I thought you were born like 1998.
No.
But if I thought one was born like in like last week. I think that the if the America had kept the same immigration levels from 1999, which was 650,000. I'm so sorry, it's so noisy outside.
No, it's okay, Ryan. It's okay. No
sorry, it's so noisy. If it was 650,000, there would be 24 million fewer people in this country. Think of how much easier buying a house would be.
Mm-hmm.
How much easier a lot of things would be. How much less costly the hospital system would be. And also how punished blue states would have been by having bad government. When 1 million people left New Jersey, 1 million New Jerseyans left the state in the last decade, they wouldn't have been replaced that many to full by immigrants. It would have just been that they had to then really deal with bad government, but they have been allowed to not deal with it because of mass immigration.
Yeah. And it's immigration has definitely been something that the left has keyed in on because, like you said, there is no repercussions for allowing these illegal immigrants in. And one of the things that
and legal, it's important, and legal immigrants.
And legal, yeah, and both. And I think one of the things that's great that DeSantis and Governor Abbott did is busing these people up to places that are sanctuary cities and letting them see just a taste of what the border states have. And and it's. I think you brought a lot of great things up here tonight, and I think you have a lot of awesome points. And Ryan, I want to end it on that because I thought that was a great ending. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Once again, he's Ryan James Girdusky. He's the author of They're Not Listening, How the Elites Created the National Populist Revolution, and the National Populist Newsletter Substack. You can go on Amazon to buy the book if you go on Ryan's Twitter, which is just at Ryan Girdusky. And you can go on there. You can get a link to his Substack there. You can get a link to his book over there. Go buy it because if you liked a little bit of what you heard, you're going to be getting a whole lot of that. It's always better in book form. You can get out so much more writing and on his Substack.
Citations.
Yeah, you got citations. And I don't know, you're a walking citation because your memory and types of things that is awesome. So anything else that you want to plug, Ryan?
No, that's all. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Right, cool. So once again, this was fantastic. I'll have to have you on again at some point soon because picking your brain's amazing. You know a lot more than I do, and I've been paying attention to this forever. But I guess having the inside baseball like you do always helps. So once again, he's David. I'm Alex. We'll be back again next week. Hopefully David won't. See you, Uncle John. I got one in. All right, Dave. Everyone, I'll talk to everyone later. So long.